So now let me please introduce the next session. We have Mr. Siddharth Bhavnani, partner Antares Legal as the moderator. Joining him on stage are Mr. Bhaskar Baruah, Chief Development Officer, ITC Hotels, Mr. Jacob Purackal, Senior Director, Development, South Asia Hilton, Mr. Manish Khanna, Chairman and MD, Jasminn Hospitality Services, Mr. Mudassir Naqib, Director, Development, Southwest Asia, IG Hotels and Resorts. Please join me in welcoming them.
Good afternoon all. Welcome to this session on evolving management contracts. My name is Siddharth, and I have the privilege of speaking to these gentlemen today. Jacob, Mudassir, and Bhaskar represent leading operators, and Manish is the owner of marquee hotel assets and will voice his concerns and thoughts on what he would expect from operators under management contracts. I'm going to start with saying, I'm hoping this is going to be an open and frank conversation. Everybody's just finished lunch. Let's give them a little bit of a wake up. So management contracts, to say the least, are documents that most have had testing times with, the thought around the skew and tilt towards operators is hard for most to understand, the uninitiated, but also those who've been through a few cycles of having dealt with management contracts. But times are changing. I think owners are more aware, fueled by market practice, fueled by institutionalization of ownerships which operate at scale, and in that sense, the ability to bring more to the table and demand that operators at least have more conversations around this contract that traditionally seemed one-sided. But maybe going into a specific point, and Bhaskar, if I can start with you, on the longevity of these contracts, because median across segments is probably 20, 21 years. And is there a way in which, in your world, this might change in some form? Is there a way in which contracts can actually get shorter in length so that the number of generations, in a sense, that are inheriting it is less? Or perhaps the other way to look at it also could be, are there structures like perhaps a franchise, which allows, an owner to step in after a little while?
Right. Thank you, Siddharth, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a fair question to ask if you are in a hurry to exit. But at ITC Hotels, we've built relationships which go beyond a scripted tenure or a scripted time span. We've had ownerships who work with us from as early as 1980s. Now, most of them don't have a large public presence maybe, but they've been invaluable supporters to us. We've probably gone through 2 or 3 renewals with them in this time. So for us, it's not the initial term period that we are so fixated about. It's the discovery that we go through in the initial years. And our belief is if we are able to take care of each other's concerns in the initial years, then term period is just an academic number. So I must proudly say that we've really let go an ownership who's weathered the initial storm together with us, and they continue to be our biggest loyalists today in the system. And we're only discovering that now because when benchmark comparison comes up and when people ask us, do you want a 10-year term or are you comfortable with a 15-year term? I don't think that concerns us really as a number. I think the platform is very different and the comfort levels is what we are pursuing jointly with any new partner or trying to grow the relationship with an existing partner. So I don't want to put out a name, but that's been the culture and that's the approach that we've always taken. And it's been fantastic for us.
That's very interesting and refreshing, actually. But perhaps, Jacob and Mudassir, for yourselves, do you see it the same way in terms of tenure of contracts?
So by nature, hotels are long-term investment class, right? So if it is a long-term asset, I think management contracts also need to reflect that same longevity of contract. So what I have seen over the last several years is, management contracts, of course, have evolved, right? I mean, they've not stood static over the last 20 years, there has been an evolution of management contracts, but certain things have stayed fairly static because they work. And one of those things is the tenure of contract. And I think a 25-year contract on average, I think is a win-win for both owner and operator, because ultimately you're creating a long-term asset class. You don't want disruption where the brand's changing frequently, you're ramping up the hotel again. So I think longevity of contract, I think is fundamental to a management contract, and I think it works for both owner and operator.
Mudassir, maybe...
on the longevity of contracts?
No, just maybe coming to a different point. Given that, perhaps, the longevity is a necessity of this structure as it is. Are there sort of, twists or innovations to performance tests that you can think of which give, owners comfort that we're happy with longevity, but we're also being tested, perhaps beyond the traditional RevPAR, but, are there structures that you all could think of?
Look, I think it depends on the deal. Every deal is unique. Sometimes there is a deal where you might experiment a bit, but typically I think management performance tests and management contracts tend to be very standardized, which is a dual-prong test, RevPAR, GOP. If you see the market, that's how generally the performance tests are. But then you might find there are certain deals there where they have a single-prong test, and that might be modified in a certain way, but that's very deal-specific. But what Jacob said, I mean, the tenure, a lot of hotel contracts mostly tend to be very standardized.
Okay. Manish, you have a view on that? I mean,
if I can maybe ask all of you is that, let's say when you talk of longevity of, let's say, 20-year contract for maybe you do it for a more upscale, some of your more upscale brands, but then some of your, let's say, budget brands, you can look at a shorter term. Because maybe the owner is, let's say the requirement of the operator is also lesser in a budget hotel more than it is in a luxury. Luxury, because it's a big investment, it's long gestation period, fine, a 20-year term is okay. Would you all be open to something like in the budget space to maybe have a slightly shorter term? 15 years, 10 years maybe.
I don't think there's a fixed answer for that, right? So what is the advantage of a short-term contract, right? So you've got to look at it in the perspective of, is there a genuine advantage for doing a short-term contract, right? How does it help a hotel if you're going to keep changing brands frequently?
No,
right? So, if there is a compelling value proposition to do a short-term contract, right, and if that can be rationalized, I'm sure people, everyone would like to look at it, right? But I don't see a compelling reason because, as I said earlier, inherently, it's a long-term asset, whether it's a budget hotel or it's an upscale or a luxury, everything's being built for the long term, right? And when it is being built for the long term, you better have a contract also which supports you through that long term. That's my perspective.
Well, like Jacob said, there has to be a compelling reason to do a short-term contract. Especially in the segment that you mentioned, where we are entering with Garner as well, but we see a massive growth in that segment. So if you have a large portfolio for a particular brand, and then we also want a certain standardization. That's how a system eventually is made, through that standardization.
Maybe I'm just, when I say from the budget space to maybe do a shorter term contract, not because one wants to exit out of it, but then taking your point forward is that if the relationship is anyway going to be that strong, it should not be a worry for both sides to frankly renew. It's just an option is what I'm just asking from my perspective.
Sure, I'll give you comfort since you're an owner on the dais. We are happy to listen to you. We are happy to support a short-term contract, but our experience is long before we come to even the end of the short term, as an owner, you will approach us to say, what can we do next? And I think that's the spirit with which often the engagement and discussion permits us to do something like that. But if we see that there are some different, let's say, strategic objectives that you are pursuing, then I support what probably, Jacob just alluded, that he's at the end of it, and so am I, representing an organization which is bringing a brand out into public use. So if in private doors, what happens need not necessarily be an impact to what a customer experiences in a certain market. So sometimes we have other levers to allow you to make better use of the real estate upcycle, if I can use that term, and have a strategic benefit for yourself without disturbing the brand ecosystem which has gone on a building, on an asset, on an address, or a restaurant, or a venue. So I think this is a balanced play between what is the objective, and I'm sure as a real estate owner, it changes from time to time. IDC Hotels also wears one side of its sleeve as an investing owning company. So we do realize that there is got to be a strategic flexibility to it, a strategic intent. But like I said, look, a healthy project everybody wants. If the health is great and you want a short term, trust me, you'll be the first one coming back and saying, let's renew. So we're happy in that spirit, happy to support a short term for sure.
Okay, that's good to know that there's openness, right? I think that will help, especially a lot of folks listening to this. So, again, I know there's only so much flex in the tenure of a contract. So then maybe outside performance test, what are the other things that ownerships would look at, right? For example, a budget approval. And perhaps Mudassir, Jacob, do you feel that, as operators, you all would be, in most instances, open to giving budget approval rights? And B, can we talk about perhaps how they could be more effective? Because as you will know, most of these contracts will say that there is no budget approval to the extent it impacts brand standards, right? And I know Manish will have a lot to say about that, but we'll come to that in a minute. But do you feel there's openness on to do more budget approval than not? And what are the fears perhaps that you all have when you give budget approval rights that are as stringent as they are?
So typically, our standard position is to give budget approval rights, but there are caveats, as you said, and they may be related to brand standards, fire life safety, IT. But again, as long as there has to be a rationale behind the caveats, you can't just go there and do anything that you want. And as I said, brand standards for us is, budget approvals for us is a given. That the owners are going to have budget approvals.
Okay.
So we have the same position, right? Our standard position is budget approval rests with the owner, right? Of course, subject to a certain amount of carve-outs. And those carve-outs are required, right? As Mudassir was just talking about. You need carve-outs for fire, life, and safety. You need carve-outs for brand standards because, if you don't, if we can't maintain brand standards, there is no brand, right? But subject to some of these carve-outs, our standard position has always been that owners approve the budget. And I think that is fundamental to any management contract because that is the level of control that an owner has.
Yeah, I think the approach is identical. We're playing in the same competitive field, and often if we are able to explain that to the ownership, and then we know what these carve-outs are for, why they are important, why that kind of brand health needs to be maintained. And I think it's an evolving discussion, also an experiential side for the owner. First budgets are usually tough ones to go through, but then when they are able to see it pan out through the course of a 12-month period, then the second and the subsequent year budgeting exercise becomes a little bit more of a, real dialogue. And then this whole approval mechanism of what is the approval for, why should it follow a particular path, what are the checks and balances, all that then becomes much more clear by the time second and third year of operations roll in.
If on this, we are definitely going to approve the budget. What was brought out by Sujan on day one also is maybe that owners have a little bit more involvement in the budgeting process. Because right now what happens is, at least in our cases, the budget is, the operator makes the budget, gives it to us, then we go through it, and then we of course discuss that what we like, what we don't like, is there an increase, decrease, etc. Some of the issue is, I think, more to get us involved in the budgeting, making of that budget with our, let's say, our finance on our side, etc., to be more involved in the budgeting process, other than just being given the budget and then we are sitting and discussing what we can cut, what we can increase, etc. So it's more about being involved in the budgeting process, is what one of the things that was discussed on day one, to have the owners more involved in that, owners and their representatives.
No, but Manish, if you were to look at it, if you're involved in the budget making process or you're commenting on the budget later, it is the same thing, right? In one case you're commenting on the budget before the budgets come to you.
It might make the whole process much faster. because then we would be involved in, because what happens, again, I'm giving an example in our case, the budgets are made, they present it to us, a lot of things are like, not like, then we waste a lot of back and forth, then we start going into refusing of round one, going into round two, then as per our contract, if we move out of round two and go into round three, then it could potentially go into, into getting a third party and all that. If the ownership is, let's say, more involved, and just to get the things done faster, nothing, not to sit and stop or cut things which are not absolutely required. And we are not compromising on talking about FLS and any of the things at any point of time. Those are standards which we cannot say no to as well. We're talking about certain other things, whether it is more of the capex that is requirement that needs to be done, or even more operating supplies, etc. Just shorten the process by involving the ownership more. That's what I'm just trying to. It's thought.
I'm just glad everybody's saying yes to budget approval. That's another conversation we have to have a lot on for owners to get. But it's actually, I'm pleasantly surprised to hear all of you say that it's sort of par for course to grant owners approval rights. Okay. Maybe to switch a little bit, and Bhaskar, if I can ask you perhaps on fee structures, right, and particularly incentive fees. What has been typical in the recent past for you all, and how do you see that moving? Is there a particular direction? Do you see it as it is today remain the way it is?
I think we're not doing anything that's different from what the industry has been practicing, at least for the last couple of decades. I think the challenge on incentive fee becoming a very tightrope walk is when we go to emerging markets, where there is no benchmark to how the team will come and set up and stabilize a hotel. We've constantly believed that talent, retention, training, and growth at the unit is one of the key success stories to see, incentive fees get better for the brand. Because too much of a shake-up, too much of uncertainty, too much of change of, left side plan to a right side plan, rate versus occupancy and things like that, can often unsettle this entire process. So incentive fees for us is a balance between probably to say that for the effort put in, there must be a risk and reward going in for the team. And again, incentive fees is so unit specific because it's the delivery. It's actually a measure of the control and command of the general manager, the planning ability, their execution ability. So we'd always encourage a healthy mix of pay for performance and kind of see the dip for lack of it. And again, incentive fees today are structured where if you are RGI 1, your incentive fee does not change. So there has got to be another kind of thought process and reward mechanism, at least for the commercial team, for those frontline sales resources who bring in a certain type of business to allow the flow through to happen comfortably. So I think incentive fee for us is much like what any of the international companies would propose in this market, but we'd like to add that often the initial years is where the support system is where an owner would seek from us to say that sometimes, some sort of a tool lever, whether it is deferment, whether it is kind of a stub or a lower track fee, but eventually we all, I think, stabilize at the same amount.
And Jacob, for yourselves, would you again be open, and we'll take from Bhaskar, would you be open to structures where owners say, for the first few years, we need support? Manish, you want to say that?
No, I think if you look at incentive fee structures also over the last 15, 20 years, right, it has evolved, right? I mean, if you went back, say, 15 years, I mean, the contracts that I remember way before I joined Hilton as well, most of the contracts had flat incentive fees, right? I mean, irrespective of performance, the incentive fee was a flat structure. Today, you'd rarely find that. I mean, most contracts today, and because, I mean, the markets have evolved, I mean, most contracts today have tiered incentive fee structures, dependent on GOP or, staggered over years, etc. So that is a form of support, right? So the operator is taking a lower fee percentage as the hotel ramps up, or, when you tie it to actual GOP percentage is achieved, an operator's making money as the performance of the hotel improves, right? Which is kind of tying up perfectly with the owner's interest and the operator's interest. And I think that's how incentive fees have to be, right? I mean, incentive fees, there has to be a kicker for improved performance, and there has to be a downside if your performance is not good. And I think that's how the market's evolved.
Manish, you've seen contracts for decades, right? Now,
So asking the panel here, because companies, three different companies, but as far as incentive fees on GOP, they you all follow slab-wise fee structures, correct?
Yeah.
So do you all have structures where if there is a lower GOP percentage that you will not take your fee on the bottom line?
So what I can say is we will never agree to a zero incentive fee structure.
Sorry?
We will never agree to a zero incentive fee structure, right?
But
so as long as we're delivering GOPs, we need to get a certain amount of fees, right? But then we are very happy to tie it to performance of the hotel. That is, you go up as the performance improves.
Sure, because we have contracts in place where based on a particular GOP percentage, there is no incentive fee. Only after it crosses a particular percentage, then the fee kicks in. And then, of course, there's a cap on the higher side. So you're not doing that now, or you've not, because it does exist.
We are not doing zero.
We are not doing that either.
As a policy.
As a policy, yeah.
Okay, because it does exist. Because that's something that we would most definitely want to look at, is that based on a particular slab, because some amount of protection we require. GOL is a different story, but if we're doing a GOP based on slab, there has to be some protection for us. You take your top line fee, you take your reservation marketing fee, but go in percentages where 0 to something is X is 0, anything above that. And it does exist.
For us, currently we don't have a deal that I can think of where it exists. Neither are we doing
It's something that we most definitely, again, talking about our company, and we are definitely insisting on that.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's there.
Well, that can be added to the owner's wish list, and I'm sure there will always be a justifiable reason for requesting that. But I think on the operations side, the pace at which a hotel operates, the dynamic intent of the team and the dynamic nature of the business often takes them away from this back-end calculation of what incentive fee or what GOP you will arrive at. So to take it away because, let's say, there was a toll gate at 20% and you arrived at 19.97, that's like that's not the most positive reaffirmation to the team that you did well through the year, but barring maybe a couple of months or based on a market scenario, you dipped below that 20% watermark level. So our sense is, and this has been deliberated for years and probably even today, it's a very hot topic, when you get into trying to lock in a commercial term, there is nothing called as no incentive fee below a particular threshold, because you're then kind of, in a way, telling the team that, you guys didn't give it 100%. I don't think hoteliers work that way, and I don't think it's possible to do it that way. And there is also a reverse analogy to it, that if a team realizes they're not going to hit the incentive fee threshold, chances are for the remainder of that year, your operations will not be spot on, because you could pad in additional costs, you could pad in additional expenses. I could hire the most expensive legal opinion on a most trivial subject and kind of just say, you know what, that opinion was more important to us in the month of December for international companies or March for a company like us, and kind of really play the entire P&Ls, And this has been an open discussion. So I don't think as a company we see merit in supporting that. In the long term, I think it is detrimental from the spirit and the energy that the hotel team or the entire ExCom needs to put forward.
No, Bhaskar, it's not something that it's putting down the operations for, let's say, a particular month. We will always hope that on a YTD basis, you will always make that GOP, right? And put you into this percentage. It's more about some amount of owner's protection for, yes, in the slower months, that if it's based on a particular slab, that because you're still getting your fees on the top line. It's not like that's not coming in. The bottom line, sure, is market driven, occupancy, situation, etc. But there has to be some protection on our side as well, and with the hope that at the end of the year, it most definitely will, it will compensate. And speaking personally, when it comes to this, when I'm talking about slab-wise, when the operator is going to do a higher GOP above a particular percentage, I personally would be okay with giving an additional 1 or 2%, because if you can give me, let's say, a 45, 48% GOP, I'm most happy to go to 8, 9, 10% also, because you've given me that GOP end of the day. So as an owner, personally, again, I would compensate by saying that if I get on a lower slab, I pay nothing. When the higher slab comes in, I'll be most definitely to offer an additional percentage from my side, so that kind of averages it out. Again, personal thoughts.
It could be, if I would say, a lot would depend on the location that you're talking
Sure.
about, the size of the hotel, the location. If it's something very compelling, it's something that, like Bhaskar said, if it's an owner wish list and the location is very compelling, we could. So there's something that eventually it'd be a company decision. But in a normal course of business, it would not be something we would do.
Well, again, I think there is a world in which that exists, as Manish says, but I've also not seen it much. So I hear where they're coming from,
Yeah.
right? Structures of, whether it's management or franchise, perhaps, for the international operators, Jacob, Mudassir, internationally, there's great success seen for the franchise model, right? There's soft branding, there's manchise. What are the possibilities or the learnings that the Indian context could use to have those come in and benefit the industry from a growth perspective?
No, so let me address franchise first, right? So I think franchise is here to stay and here to grow, right? Now, if I were to just take Hilton's, if I just look at our portfolio, if you look at North America, 95% of our hotels are franchised, 5% is managed. And those managed hotels would essentially be the luxury upper upscale hotels, right? Now that market is at a different level of evolution, right? It's a mature market, it's a different level of evolution. You have established third-party operators, you have established individual operators, etc. And that's why franchising is what works over there, where the brand drives distribution and owners are able to drive operations, bring in their skills for operations. If I were to look at China again, right? And China is possibly a few years ahead of India right now. But in China today, our portfolio is 60% franchise, 40% managed, right? And it would have been the other way just 10 years back, right? Now, again, that market's reaching a different level of maturity, and as markets mature and, hotels start moving into smaller cities, hotels start penetrating the economy, mid-scale space more, I think franchising is what would drive growth. And I think the same thing will happen in India. Case in point being, we signed 2 SLAs last year, right? We signed an SLA for our Spark by Hilton brand and the Hampton by Hilton brand, which are in the mid-scale and premium economy space. And these are both franchised, right? And that's because once you get into these segments and you start going into the smaller markets, I don't think brands can really scale up to manage all those hotels, and franchising would be the way to go. Soft brands and other things, those are again opportunities which are there. We are actively doing soft brands in India, right? And a lot of the soft brands that we have signed up in India at least are franchised, right? So I think all of these options will be there and the markets will keep evolving, right? But in the future, I think franchising is what would pick up in a strong way.
I tend to agree with what Jacob says, especially the mid-market, which is a massive segment for any operator. And that's where franchising, third-party management, that would be something that would be, I think, the way forward for us as well in the mid-scale segment. And the higher you go, then probably management makes more sense. That's where you focus, and generally the revenues tend to be more and the operating costs tend to be higher, where an operator, at least they're of more benefit to the owner than in the mid-scale segment, where you're looking at their distribution network and their sales and marketing support.
What is the percentage of franchise to managed in India for the larger brands?
If you're asking,
Any of you, yeah.
No, I can talk about our portfolio. It's roughly, I think 15 to 18% of our portfolio in India is franchise right now.
Yeah, so it is 80-20.
Yeah. But management is still predominant in the APAC region, right? So in the wider APAC region, management still dominates. But the moment you go back to these more mature markets, you see franchising is the way.
And this again, if I can comment to say that it's good to see this change because in the last, let's say, 15 years, it was different where it would be 99% managed and 1% franchise. So it's good to see that change coming in because let's say, okay, maybe in our case, we decided to go in for management, but if there was a franchise option, we would have taken it, or we didn't have that choice. And I'm just to give you a back, as far as IHG is concerned, that after a particular time, talking about 20 years ago or 15 years ago, there wasn't a choice for franchise. Rather, it was only managed. And I know you have a couple of franchise properties, even which are old legacy properties, which they managed to retain the franchise, but everybody else was in, otherwise it was always being insisted on management, not franchise. So it's good to see the change happening.
No, absolutely. Now, I think, especially even like for a holiday, and if there's an opportunity and the owner has the ability to manage it, we'd be happy to consider it.
It's different.
So you've been through both, right? You've been through what, 3 decades of franchise and a decade and a half of management.
Yeah. So because like I said, because in, let's say early in 2006, 2007, there was no choice of franchise as on IHG particularly. It was management only. So it's good that the change is happening. Because you made, again, that word was used that, that the West market is more mature. But I think with the very fact that we have all the brands in India today and they've been there for so long, the market, I think, is mature enough for you to give more opportunities for franchising over management. As long as we meet your brand standards.
We're doing that. That's why we see a lot of our colleagues who represent the franchise teams, the franchise divisions. They're here. They're attending. Like for us, the head of franchise for India, Middle East, Africa, he's here representing IHG.
That's a change which I would say is in the last 5-7 years.
Last couple of years, because the market's
because again,
gone in
we
that
are
direction.
well into our older contracts, so again, it's something which is different. So we're just learning about it now.
I'm going to see if I can ask this question without putting you on the spot. Operator agnostic feedback of years as franchise versus years under management contract, if that's possible to do.
It was, I mean, we've been okay both ways. We had different reasons for going in for management because it suited us at the time. When we were a franchise, I think we managed to maintain the brand standards in those days. So we're talking from the 70s, right, till up to till 2006, right? So we're okay. We manage both. I would, now that this option is available, given the opportunity, I would definitely look at franchise over a management. And it's not just a fee structure. It's just that maybe we can speak differently because some of us are anyway hoteliers. So maybe we think that we will be able to manage it ourselves as long as we keep to your standards. But I've been comfortable with both, frankly. I'm just glad to know that I have the option.
And to enable that, perhaps the ecosystem of third-party managers needs to build little, and hopefully India will see more of that in the near future.
It's an upcoming model which, yes, it will work because then you're protected on the fee structure as far as being a franchise is concerned. You can take a third-party manager and get into that so that he still runs the show for you, but the fees would be probably lesser than what a pure management contract would be.
No, so I think if you look at franchising today in India, at least it's predominantly owner-operator, right? I mean, so whatever franchises that we have also done, it's the owner operating the asset, and I think that would be pretty similar to all the other brands. But third-party management is coming, and that is a space that is going to grow, right? There definitely is great opportunity for it, and it is a space that is going to grow. And that was one of the intentions, when we signed up for Hampton and Spark with our partners, Olive and Nile. So they are essentially third-party managers for us, right, for these brands. But this is a space that is going to grow.
Absolutely.
And is that a corollary that as the third-party management ecosystem becomes stronger in a sense, or it becomes tested, you all would be happier to do more franchises as you go along?
I think as Mudassir also said earlier, right, it depends on the segment, right?
Yeah.
So luxury upper upscale, to a large extent even upscale, will continue to be brand run, right? It will be management contracts. You go below that, I think that's where the opportunity for franchise is. And if you look at the pyramid of development, that is where the opportunity is going to be.
Bhaskar, there is, in the Indian hospitality growth story, we've seen a lot of institutionalization of ownerships, right? Over the years, there's been large financial institutions which have shown interest in investing in the Indian ecosystem. Does that put operators under additional performance scrutiny in your mind? Have operators found that to be a reason for a shift to be more performance driven in any sense?
Absolutely. I think it's the other way around. They've been driven for performance and then come under scrutiny.
Sure.
Institutional ownership is bound to mature, grow, and become sizable in India. There are no two ways about it. When we speak about the pace at which we are likely to grow in the next 5 years, the milestones that we are at least envisioning for 2030, a large pie will be through institutional ownership. Now, these are strong signs to say that the type of ownership profile is also branching out. The type of education cycle that operators or the discussions that we have with an ownership is also evolving. And so performance and the savviness of an institutional investor by way of the metrics that they are chasing, by way of the kind of wins that they are seeking through their investments is also a learning curve for the operator. So we often go into what's could be termed as a very steady state mode with a traditional ownership mindset who have always pursued a certain benchmark. But I think institutional investors, and they come in also different categories with different objectives, some short term, some large term, some in a very aggressive acquisition mode, some in a very consolidation mode. So it's a learning curve. I think this is making the entire managed space much more interesting. We're able to learn a lot more each time a new investor house comes into this country. I think the way they are seeing the dynamic nature of the business or where they are seeing the kind of entry points and exit points, it's a brilliant learning cycle for all of us. So I think it's not pressure. I think we are performing and hence they are engaging with us. And with that, there will be some differences of opinion, which over time, I'm sure will be an education cycle as well of one kind.
Mudassir, your view on that?
I agree with Bhaskar. Look, I mean, the way institutional investors look at a hotel is obviously more, different matrices they use. But to be honest to you, family investors, they're also very particular how they view the returns. It's no less, maybe, sometimes they may not use the fancy jargons at the end of the day. They also want to maximize their returns. And, sometimes with an institutional investor, the person you're dealing with, he may change, but you can't change families. The person on the other side remains, it's the same person.
You have to live with us.
Yeah, I mean, and majority of the owners in India are still family owners. So there's learning with every kind of ownership, whether it be different family owners, different institutional owners. I mean, that's the nature of, I guess, every job. You just keep on learning, and that's what makes you better as well. I mean, day in and day out, there's a learning every day.
Yeah, and that has its impact on deal terms as well, right? When you talk about management contracts, hopefully the ecosystem evolves to where operators, are listening more also to, because you're dealing with a larger institution that you have to negotiate your deal terms with rather than individuals or families, and perhaps that will also allow folks like Manish to get a structure of a contract which may be more palatable for him. Right? Yeah.
But we'll probably be more flexible than an institutional investor.
Because
they'll be like Bhaskar mentioned, they have different purposes that what they're investing for, how long they're in it for. We are definitely then for probably a longer term. So to go back to accept your point of contracts of a longer contract also for. So, but institutional guys have their own, they need to make faster money and get out and stuff. So we may not, we are generally probably going to be more flexible.
Quite honestly, I mean, for us, the commercials would depend on the nature of the deal. I mean, if it's just a normal deal which an institutional owner is getting, I mean, I don't see why we would give them a special deal unless there was something very large at stake. And similarly, I mean, you could have a family ownership with a billboard halo deal. You'd view it very differently. I mean, for me, I mean, the way we look at it generally, I guess most companies, the way they look at a deal, it depends on its nature, its location, size. That would define the deal terms, the objectives.
Moving a little bit to what has been spoken of earlier in the last couple of days as well, which is, sustainability. And Jacob Hilton would have a comprehensive ESG policy. And do you see that translating into India as easily as perhaps you've seen globally? And are owners receptive to the cause that it is?
No, so I think sustainability is not a choice, right? Sustainability is something that has to be practiced, so there's no choice to it. So way back in 2008, I think Hilton announced our sustainability goals under what's called Travel with Purpose, which had dedicated targets on reducing our carbon footprint. And there have been things that we've been driving through these years, right? Whether it's reducing, single-use plastic, linen recycling, soap recycling, etc. There've been multiple initiatives that we've been running. When it comes to ownerships, right, I mean, especially when you take institutional ownerships, they are very particular about this, right? And it does become a differentiating factor when you're pitching into institutional ownerships who do care a lot more for some of these aspects. Even for, what we have noticed is for some of our conference-heavy hotels, right, it is a distinguishing factor for people booking business. They do look at, whether you're net zero, et cetera, right? It is a distinguishing factor. So I don't think sustainability or sustainable initiatives are a choice anymore, right? It is something that everyone needs to do, and it is the way to go.
I think, Manish, you were saying that you as an owner would, because you see the long-term benefits for it, you would also subscribe.
So like we were just talking earlier, one is, like you said, sustainability is not an option anymore. It needs to be done for, and we have to be honest, it's being done for, if we can be so bold as to say, on one hand, you have to save the world, but on the other hand, sustainability translates into savings in every respect. Because whatever you do, like we were just discussing earlier, whether if I put in a more efficient air conditioning plant, I mean, go to the most basic, like we keep saying, just change LED bulbs, or use less water, we are genuinely making a difference, but at the same time, it's reducing the cost for everyone. So it's something which I would encourage it to be, it has to be part of, from the design process, right from ground up. You have to do that, whether it is using materials and everything. So definitely on with it. Can't stay away from it.
Okay, that's good. Then we easily agree on that. So I'm going to look there because we've got about 12 minutes to go, and there are a couple of very interesting questions, and perhaps we'll just pick from there because I know, Manish, you want to talk something about brand standards? I'll read out the first one. I can just about see it. Isn't it a contradiction that the operator is responsible for standards, but the owner's budget approval is without approval for brand-related expenses? I think what we were speaking about earlier on brand standards and how owners can sort of decipher what they're intended to be.
So it is as far as it's definitely a contradiction because so this may sound like a bit of a rant, but as far as brand standards are concerned, I'm just taking this question a little bit like we just spoke of. I think that all the operators in the country need to look at brand standards catered much more locally than they are now. There's a lot of the brand standards which are very generalized, which talk of, let's say they take international standards and then don't necessarily, they may not apply to us locally in India. Now, brands will say that yes, we have changed a lot of our standards to adapt to local things, but one of the pet peeve always, for example, is the famous room size, right? You have a particular room size for a brand which you say that it has to be this in India, and without which you will not sign the contract, and we've gone through that. But the same brand in a European and US market is 20-30% smaller than what you have in Asia. Then similarly, it would in India, and then certain other requirements of the hotels that you need in India, but you don't have them in the West. So, and then again, your answer is that those markets are different, the requirements are different. It's based on city. A city like Bombay, which has no space, and there are existing properties who are they were built at a time with a particular size, keeping that brand in mind. If today that has to undergo a transformation to, let's say, a better brand, we won't be able to get that because we're not meeting your brand standard in terms of rooms. But again, the way it's located, where it's located, I can't do much more than what it is. So if and when are you compromising to accept that size and still give a better brand to that particular property? And we all, again, without taking any particular names and things, it has been done in India. I'll just generalize it that brand standards have been compromised to a large extent. For whatever reasons the brands did it, gave a particular brand where it most definitely didn't deserve it, but they got it. So how much of flexibility are you going to do? Because that is something which definitely concerns us.
So you're saying there's differentiation between two assets?
Huge differentiation for the same,
brand.
Again, I'll just give that I'll give that example. 10 days ago, I was in 2 different hotels in Paris, one at the airport and one in downtown. No doubt, downtown, peak, beautiful area, 5 minutes away from the Champs-Élysées, etc. I was staying in a brand, and that room size of that brand was a 19 square meter room, and the exact same brand at the airport was a 32 square meter room. So now, of course, we'll be told that, oh, because it was in downtown Paris, we can't change the building, but then don't give it that brand. Give it one of your lower brands then. Big variance between the standard. The reception in the Paris hotel in downtown was a computer with a stool, and at the airport was a counter with 4 people. Okay. Yes, of course, the property was larger at the airport, but then again, change the standards and give it a different brand, give it a higher brand then in your chain.
Are you saying that there should be flexibility or no flexibility?
There should be. You have to customize much more.
No, because
up to India, because it's something where, just to give you my opinion, is that you will get a lot more opportunities, a lot more sign-ups and properties if you sit and do a lot more localization.
No, so I think all brands have localized and regionalized, right? I wouldn't say that brands have not regionalized in India. I think all brands have regionalized. The core ethos of the brand has to stay the same. Now, you can't change the ethos of the brand because of the region that you're in. The core ethos stays the same, but I think brands have regionalized to a large extent. Now, this flexibility on room sizes, that's the nature of the market, right? If you're sitting if you get an opportunity in the midst of BKC today, right, where real estate is so expensive, you've got to make sure that that hotel works in that market. Now, you can't, and that's where, certain, what you would say, compromises, I just say that you're fitting it in to make that hotel work in that market, right? And that's where the brand is working with the owner to ensure that, your returns are proportionate to your investment. Right, so you've got to make it so, and at the same time, if you're sitting in a place where real estate is not as expensive, you will stick to your core standards. So I think all brands are flexible. It depends on the nature of the market. And you can't have a one-size-fits-all. You have to be adaptable and flexible.
You have different brands, and all I'm saying is that if you, in an example of a 45 square meter room for there's brand X, that requires a 45 square meter room, that same brand X has been applied to a hotel which has a 29 square meter room. I don't personally understand how that is possible. Don't give it brand X, make it brand Y in the chain as far as the operator is concerned. You have multiple brands, fit in a different brand, but you can't expect to have the same brand X and brand X with 2 such varied sizes. And in Ashish's presentation earlier, when he said things like, for example, the bed does not necessarily give you better sleep, and that better sleep does not translate into better room rates, right? From a small express kind of a hotel, a guest will, that's when he's choosing it for the location. He's choosing it for the brand name and the reputation but he's not paying you extra money for a better bed, or he's not paying you extra money for the room size. He's there because of, frankly, price is the first reason in a market where there are 4 different brands of one operator, and he's just going to really pick out the best rate that he gets. And at the same time, luxury property in one market sometimes sells below a budget property of the same brand. The customer is going in for the price. That's what makes a difference. So how much of those brand standards are really, affecting the decision? I mean,
it's a larger question, but just a couple more. I saw a question right at the top. What exit options do owners typically have in case of non-performance by the operators, as these are long-term contracts? I can answer that. None. Performance termination aside, right, which is as realistic as they are, I think there's very little that one can actually do. But there was a question earlier, which I'd put to perhaps the 3 of you all. How do you give comfort to owners in the concept of area of protection, right? How do you approach that? Because every brand has multiple sub-brands, right? And the protection is given against the named brand. So perhaps that question is posed to you, and how do you, Mudassir, perhaps you could give an insight on that?
I guess you got to be reasonable, both parties. I mean, either ways. I mean, someone will ask you for a 20, 25 square kilometer radius, the entire city. But then you got to look at what is reasonable, how much, does an AOP really matter to the hotel, how much of it matters. So, there's no standard answer, quite honestly, for it. I mean, then you can address it in multiple ways. I mean, you can have a radius, you could draw a particular area, you could look at the tenure, you could even link a certain number of years to the performance of the hotel. So there are multiple ways, whatever would give comfort to the hotel owner, as well as it would make sense for the brand in terms of the way the city is growing. Because some markets, I mean, if you look at them 10 years ago, you would never believe that they would grow the way they're growing right now. So you also have to take the long-term horizon of that particular city into perspective. Plus, I think generally a brand, they would never they'd like to see one happy owner than 2 unhappy owners. So you'd also take that into consideration as a company and how you'd grow in a particular market.
So, when we see contracts for owners, and again, not any specific operator, but you see a bunch of followaways in respect of the AOP, right? So for example, construction timeline could be one of them. If you miss a construction timeline, the AOP falls. On the flip, in your experience, has there ever been a benefit granted to the owner? For example, an extension of the AOP if the hotel's not doing what you all had all thought it would do in the first few years? No.
No benefit in terms of AOP?
Yeah, an extension of it perhaps in terms of its time.
No, I think all operators are responsible. I mean, as Mudassir said some time back, right? All of us want to grow with existing owners. I'd rather have one happy owner rather than have 2 unhappy owners. We would only do a second hotel of the same brand in that same zone if we believe we can support a second hotel. If the market does not exist for a second hotel in that same market, I would end up having 2 unhappy owners and 2 underperforming hotels. So why would I do that?
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, I think the question also was that if there are competing brands but not the same brand, right? One up, one low, which might and we were speaking about this earlier, Manish. A lot of people often just go onto a site and pick the brand or pick their stay purely on the pricing on the particular day.
Correct.
Right? And therefore, that in a sense is competition. No, Manish, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It turns out to be. And if we're going on with that question on the exit option also, it's, I don't know how much choice we have in terms of exit options. It's something which is definitely more heavily focused on the operator side than it is on the, but the only option we have, I guess, based on all our contracts that we have signed is if the brand has really underperformed that much and then you don't implement your cure period, that's the only choice we have, right? But I don't know, it's,
Yeah, no, the performance test is the only
that's
the
the only
out.
thing that we
That's-
put in.
That's a
What
clear,
type
that's a
of
clear
performance
answer.
test, that again is something which we may not touch on, because nowadays everybody's offering a RevPAR test. In the past, we used to have it based on GOP.
GOP, sure.
And again, a comment was made on day one where maybe FFNE reserve needs to be brought up into the, because FFNE reserve is always taken at the, taken below. That's something which we might get some better opportunities as owners if the FFNE reserve comes into the, as part of the GOP, and then base it according to that, so.
Okay, I think we're just about out of time. But thank you very much for sharing your insightful thoughts. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.